Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the Skift Business Travel Online Summit. This will be our first in a series of online summits called Travel's Path Forward from Skift. We're going to be diving into these challenges, shifts in strategy, and solutions needed for business travel in this unique time. We'll be recording this event and interviews for archival on our website. Should you miss any of these discussions, there will not be Q&A via Zoom, but a number of attendees have already sent in questions via email, and you can also use the hashtag #SkiftSummit to ask questions on Twitter. Of course, we'd like to thank all of the incredible speakers for sharing their time and perspectives today, as well as our partner Medallia for sponsoring today's online summit. So to kick things off, we have, please join me in welcoming Skift's CEO and founder, Rafat Ali.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for that. And welcome everyone to our first ever Skift online summit. As Brian mentioned, we're doing this series of summits over the next few weeks called Travel's Path Forward. As the name suggests, it's going to be about what is Travel's Path Forward in different sectors. The first one that we thought would be the most appropriate one is probably the sector that is most hit out of all sectors in travel. Certainly the first one to get hit, which was business travel. And so over the next couple of hours, you will hear from about 5 or 6 speakers from different parts of the travel industry, from the corporate travel world, on what's happening in their businesses, how are they looking forward to when the eventual recovery starts. So I just want to give a sense of what's happening at Skift. We have been covering this from the start. I think from late Jan is when we started covering when China started getting affected. We understood how it was going to affect the travel industry. Obviously didn't have a sense of the impact around the world, but we saw it coming as soon as it started coming out of China, because obviously Chinese travelers are a huge part of the economy for the world travel. So we've been covering this live on the Skift live blog, Coronavirus and the Travel Industry. If you go to the homepage, if you haven't, there's a link to this. This is the hub of all what is happening in the global travel industry through our own original stories that our journalists are working 24/7 for it, our research analysts, our other parts of Skift. And so you'll see daily coverage on what's happening. So this will be the hub that will be active, I think, for the next how many months. And so this and other things, from whether it's our daily coverage, whether it's Skift Research, whether it's from Airline Weekly, which is our subscription newsletter that covers the airline sector, or it's from Event MB, which covers what's happening in the event sector, obviously another huge sector that's been affected as well. So that's our role. Our role is not to be the booster of the industry in the best of times. It's also not to be the booster of the industry in the worst of times, unfortunately. Our role is to shine a spotlight on what's happening and to decipher the path ahead. So that is our role that we will continue to play. I do want to thank our sponsor, Medallia. I know Jeffrey from Medallia is going to speak later, so I'm actually excited to hear what he has to say there. One of the things that I will end with is, obviously this has been as tough a time for Skift as it is for the rest of the travel industry. And we're going through all the pains that all of you who are here, I'm sure listening, are going through. So our independent journalism is extremely crucial, we think, in these times. I know you obviously rely on it. So one of the things we did is we opened these voluntary contributions, which I know many of you have who are listening in. And if you do want to support Skift and the kind of work that we do and will continue to do, you should go to my.skift.com/support. And you can pay whatever you want and will hopefully help us to continue to do what we do. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Brian and get the program started.
Thank you, Rafat. So before we kick things off here, I did want to get started with a brief audience poll, which you should see coming onto your screen just about now. Here we go. So the question is, as we get into this discussion, how quickly will companies want to restart their business travel? Do we think it's going to be right after the travel bans, or will corporate travel come back strongly? Will it take a few months? So we're seeing a lot of your results come in. I'll give us a second here. And as we are waiting for those results to come in, I will introduce this next discussion. So as we jump into our first talk here for the day, this will be how can business travel adapt when it returns? We'll be featuring Global Director, Travel and Meetings and Payments at Microsoft, Eric Bailey, along with Managing Partner at Festive Road, Caroline Strachan. And this will be moderated by our longtime, now emeritus Senior Enterprise Editor at Skift, Andrew Shavakman. So as we are waiting for these results to come in, let's see here, seeing a few more vote. It looks like we have so far about a pretty large percentage in the middle, starting that it will restart slowly over the testing the waters in a few months. So I'm going to end the poll now. I think we'll probably see this and share these results. So as you could see, we have 61% companies will wait a few minutes to restart slowly, testing the waters. And that's a bit of what we're going to discuss here today. So I'll turn it over now to Andrew, Eric, and Caroline.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us here today. We're here because a very unprecedented event has happened. You just saw the results of that poll. More than half of you out there think it's going to be at least a few months until travel begins to slowly return. So we have with us here for this panel two very smart people, Eric Bailey of Microsoft and Caroline Strachan of Festive Road. We're supposed to be looking at how business travel can adapt for the future, but I did want to start with a little bit of how we got here. So Eric, from your position at Microsoft, you must have had insight into all of this happening in real time with travelers all over the world, with different departments in different countries. I wanted to ask you for a little bit of context on how exactly this went down and how did a company so the size of Microsoft sort of react to it, something that happened sort of quickly, slowly, and very unprecedented.
Yeah, it happened in slow motion in front of all of us, kind of. But yeah, it was mid-January that we really started tracking it. Now, since the base was out of Wuhan, we really have very few operations there, so it was a fairly minimal effect. I mean, we had a few dozen people that were there maybe for some leisure travel. We had people going near there. And so, it was tracking all of those people, finding out what the status was. As we saw some of that expand out in, as you look at Singapore and Hong Kong, then we started getting hundreds of people affected. And with that, it was, okay, let's get out there. Let's be proactive as much as possible, reaching out to each of those people, making sure they got back. And then, I mean, as we said, as it kind of went across the globe, each one of those, it was, as soon as we found something out, we would begin tracking immediately. So my team around the world would start really just tracking people, see what they could do, rebooking tickets, getting them out if they needed to, finding out if they wanted to stay where they are, because we do have a lot of people that were, there's relocations happening. There's, there's people that live overseas. There's all sorts of different things that were happening that gave different, each individual has to have their own priority. And it isn't like you just say, here's 400 people, bring them home, and then that's it. So as you were saying, it kind of happened in slow motion in emergency sort of fashion, which is how a lot of these things happen.
Right, that makes sense. And Caroline, I know that you work with clients all over the world. How did this happen to some of the smaller companies out there? Because it's been a very difficult time. I'm curious your take on how this sort of went down.
Not necessarily about size of company, more about the maturity of their travel program. So Eric has an incredibly mature program that they've been managing beautifully for years. There are still some large companies out there that would have struggled and not had the same kind of response that Eric did. But most small companies that we've heard from that have maybe struggled, maybe didn't have a crisis management plan in place. For some, maybe they didn't even have an appointed TMC online booking tool or a platform player in place either. And sadly, when things like this happen, it then restates the case for a managed travel program. So the execs are there shouting, why don't I know where everyone is? And a travel manager somewhere in the world might say, well, I told you so. That's why we've been trying to put this managed program in place. So I would suggest you'll have seen everything from that up to what Eric just described and everything in between. We've heard all sorts of responses, but there will be those that still don't know how many people they actually had affected through their travel program. It depends how strong their managed model is.
Right. Yeah. So now let's look at the future as much as we can. I mean, I don't know how much you two are on social media. I know Carolyn is. You have people saying travel is doomed. It's going to take years to come back. You have people who are saying, this is just a blip. People want to travel. There's demand there from corporates. It's a complicated situation. So I am curious what the outlook is from here in this ongoing situation. It's kind of impossible to tell right now, in my opinion. I was curious, Eric, what your take is on sort of the big issue of what is going to happen in terms of travel demand.
So I just have to predict the future. Is that all?
Yeah, that's it. That's why you're
okay,
here.
Perfect. Okay. If I look to the past, isn't that how you're supposed to predict the future? But if I look to the past, I would say, I think there will be a fundamental shift in the way people do travel. I don't know exactly what that means, but for example, we still travel less as both intensity per employee and intensity per dollar revenue than we did 12 years ago. We've seen that number has typically dropped. And it's because the need to travel, and I think that's what's going to change dramatically here, is that the need to travel and the perceived need to travel, I think you're going to see a fundamental shift in how that happens now. Now, it doesn't mean that people stop traveling necessarily, but it does mean that they change the way that they travel and that they don't necessarily need to be face-to-face for a lot of things. Training and stuff like that, now that everybody has been, for weeks at home, they'll see, wait, I can actually do trainings, I can do regular meetings, I can get information back and forth without having the actual event. What they're not going to have, though, is some of that personal stuff. So I almost see more of those personal events where people just get together and it truly is just to socialize, just to kind of brainstorm, just to do some of those things. So you'll see some shifts. I don't know what that means overall for the volumes, but as I said, we travel, I think it's 25% less per employee than we did 10 years ago. And it's simply because everybody is used to video, chats. Everybody is screen sharing all the time, 10 times a day. And when you do that, as opposed to, every once in a while I'll get on one of those old conference calls where you hear a beep and somebody comes in and, which is like 15, 20-year-old technology, but people are still using that, or people were using that 2 months ago. People won't be using that when we get out of this.
Right. Carolyn, any thoughts?
I generally don't disagree with Eric, so I'll not start today. What I would say is I think there's a real opportunity that exists right now within the travel management community. So in situations like this, we see a three-stage approach. We see the response phase, which Eric just talked about. It's messy, it's ugly. I think most of the travel buyers are through that now. You then go into a prepare phase, which in previous situations, we've got through that really quickly. That prepare phase is going to be here for quite a while, I would suggest. And the prepare phase is you're building up for the return. So what I would add to what Eric has just said is my call to action for travel managers around the world is listen to your employees, not necessarily your travelers, but your employees right now, to understand what they are finding harder. So when this has happened to me in previous lives, for instance, your 9/11s and your global financial crisis, or indeed just companies imposing travel bans for financial reasons, the first thing we would always do as a travel team is mobilize and quickly get out there and listen to travelers. It tells you so much about the real reasons why they travel. Now, you'll discover some bad travel, right? A great Amex exec called Hervé Sedki used to describe it as it's like cholesterol. You need to encourage the good and discourage the bad, right? And so it's exactly like that. If you can actually in this period unfold what's going to truly help drive your company's success in the future, what type of travel should you be investing in, that actually I think is a great use of time, but hopefully will pull you out stronger on the other side. So I've had examples shared with travelers that we've listened to where if you're in a travel ban situation, some have talked about their personal circumstances where, you know, they've shared as drastic things as, I think I'm going to end up going through a divorce because I don't think I can face living with my partner anymore. I've traveled my whole life, so all of a sudden I'm not traveling, and you know I need to deal with my partner back home, through to very real examples of I'm struggling to engage my team. Research and developer scientists, I'm struggling to be sat next to somebody on a bench working out that next cure that we're looking for. So I think now is the time to look for the valid reasons for travel. And as Eric suggested, I think with everyone, if you weren't working virtually before very well, you've had to learn very quickly. So some of that will stay, but I would suggest that the smart companies will work out the real reasons for travel.
Right. Yeah, we have those people crawling out of their skin to get on the road again. We had one guy offer to fly his private plane. He's like, would it be okay if I just fly? I have to go up and see a customer. And you're like, who's going to see you now, for one thing? But yeah, there are definitely those people that just feel that need to be out on the road. And you're going to have some of those. The question is, how many of those need to be out on the road? Right, Carolyn?
Exactly. Is it a personal preference?
Yeah.
And they just don't know any other way? Or is it the most valid way to deliver that business objective?
So what I'm hearing is there's an opportunity to be really pragmatic here and examine what your company actually needs as opposed to maybe what people want.
Do you know, it actually links to a topic that the business travel industry has struggled with for years, which is the return on investment of travel. And, you know, that's not something I'm about to start trying to tackle today myself, but I would suggest that without trying to get it into some form of metric, I think if you think of at the moment, I imagine most companies are at a zero position, right? There is no travel happening.
Yep.
In my whole life in the business travel industry, I have never known a zero position. So you've now got a zero-based budget. Anything you now build back up on that, actually, you have the opportunity to say, we currently spend 100 million on travel. Actually, we now truly understand the real reasons why we should be traveling. Do you know what? We should spend 150 million because it's going to really help us grow our top line. Or actually this 100 million is very frivolous and actually we could get away with 20 million in the type of company that we are. That's the conversation I would love to see happening amongst the business travel community at the moment.
And Carolyn, it's not about the dollars. I mean, I don't think it's going to be about the dollars. It's about the time. Can you spend more time, right? And the other thing too that we have now is so much computing power. As some of the stuff that we're looking at, how often do you email or how often do you use Teams with your customers? Are you able to still close sales while you do that? Where is the gap? So what we'll do is we'll find out these customers actually, when you don't travel, buy exactly the same amount. These customers, when you don't travel, need some different hand-holding or different, you know, and maybe it's new customers versus old customers, but it's one of these factors in there. And we'll actually be able to figure out some of that stuff now, because as you said, we went to zero. We'll go back to 70, 80, 90, you know, whatever we go back to. And then we'll see where the effective use of that. And once again, it's the time, I think, more even than the dollars.
So, you know, I've heard you talk a lot about time, and I know that's one of your key metrics, and I know it will be really critical to Microsoft. I would just share what we see elsewhere is that travel is still a line item on a P&L that a CFO is trying to control. So I think we'll see everything in between. We'll see those smart, forward-thinking companies that are truly working out the right reasons for travel. And then at the other end, you're going to have the CFO, or indeed any P&L owner, who is saying, when this comes back, I don't want the dam gates opening and there being this massive flood of demand. I need to find a way of opening those in the right way to the right people for the right trips. Mm-hmm. So that's what travel managers could be preparing now and doing all sorts of scenario planning with their execs.
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting. So what about sort of the traveler in all of this? A lot of people are scared. They it's a scary situation for travel in general. Even if we get in all clear, people might be hesitant to get on that plane, stay in that hotel. Who knows if their favorite hotel that they're comfortable with will even be there after this, given what's happened to the hotel sector. How are you two thinking about sort of the traveler experience part of this and what it could mean for when we come out of this into a different world?
Carolyn, I'll let you go first on that.
Is that just to give you a little bit of extra time to think?
Yeah.
Sure, Eric. I'm used to doing that. So you're right, Andrew, in that thinking about the traveller, and we've debated this actually in Festive Road quite a lot. We use Slack for our internal debates. And my response was, they're a really resilient, hardy bunch of people, business travellers. They've been through difficulty in the past. They'll be ready. They'll be like a group of caged animals ready to get back out on the road. And my team very quickly challenged me on that and said, hang on a minute, this is different. So what if you are a hardy, resilient, frequent traveller, but you have a child at home with asthma, right? You're likely going to be a bit more concerned about your first trip back out on the road. What if when we do reopen, and it's, I think we can all agree, one day we're not going to wake up and lots of buttons are going to flick around the world and all of a sudden countries are going to be open again. There's going to be a period where some countries are more open than others, and they're going to have certain restrictions. So what if you arrive in China and you have to isolate for 2 weeks? That's a long business trip, right? So it's going to have to be an incredibly critical reason for you to go when most people would go down and in and out in 4 nights. So I think when I talk about scenario planning, I'm thinking of 2 different aspects here. I'm thinking what the business needs. So what the travel management team need to be delivering, because travel ultimately is an enabler of a global business. So that's your role that you're delivering for your company. But at the same time, you need to be working really closely with HR, wellbeing, security teams to say, what does travel look like in this new world? I don't want to be a scaremonger because that's not our way at all. But what will that look like? At the moment, I don't think anyone knows. So we need to be, as that information does become available, we all need to be ready to support travelers with the right information so they can feel comfortable doing the travel that their company needs them to do.
Yeah, and I think you'll find it'll start with a trickle. Now, the problem is we don't know how to run this industry with just a very small volume, right? You can't fly a plane with 5 people on it or 10 people on it. Although we actually are looking at scenarios where, hey, if we had 20 people, could we, and maybe it's very expensive, could we get on a plane to go somewhere? But I think you'll start to have kind of this curated experience end to end. And Carolyn, that's kind of funny because this is actually also the exact same personalized experience that we've been talking about for years. But it's, who picks you up at your house? Because guess what? You're not going to get in a Uber pool, that's for sure, right? So you're going to know the driver that's going to pick you up at your house. You're going to know the terminal that you're going to. Everybody in that thing I can see. I don't know how you do it yet, but there'll be some sort of certification. You're going to know the driver on the other side. You're going to know what hotel you're staying in. You're going to know which restaurants you're going to eat at, right? You're not going to be walking out to the night market and just picking up food somewhere. You're going to go and you're going to eat in that hotel probably. You're going to go to one particular building. So I think I think what you'll start to see is all of that will be end to end, will be completely planned out ahead of time for the travelers. Because I think you're right that some people are just itching to get out there and they don't really care about the consequences. Others, I think they see, and I don't know if that others is 10% or 60% are going to be like, I just don't know if I can take that risk for my family, for my community. And they'll start looking at things. I think carbon footprint, they're going to look at a lot more, right? They're going to look at socially, how can I be responsible about this entire trip? So I think we're going to see a lot of things change. I don't know exactly what they're going to be.
It's an interesting point. So when it comes to someone being comfortable with the airline or the hotel, right now the suppliers are hammered. It's an unprecedented situation. I mean, obviously it's too soon to think about outcomes or what it will look like when things start to come back. But this has sort of thrown a wrench into the very core of how the sector works. Like, as you alluded to, Eric, this industry doesn't know how to work without volume.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts. So you really see maybe partnerships, new forms of service emerging out of this that are more controlled and dedicated to the individual traveler.
I think, yeah, there'll be some of that dedicated to the individual traveler. I think you'll also have to see the companies all working together. I mean, this is totally my personal opinion and not necessarily based on anything else. I think you actually almost have to go to monopoly power by route. So you can't fly, because there won't be nonstops, Seattle to Beijing, San Francisco to Beijing, LA to Beijing. You can't fill all those up. And you can't have 7 airlines doing those and competing in them. You need like 1 flight a day going to Beijing from the US, right? I mean, that's how things will start back. So I think there'll be fundamental shifts in the business, both, but I've always said, I think those are opportunities. I think that those are opportunities to have better experience for people. I think those are opportunities to have safer experiences for people. And I mean, the new word that we use, which, you know, we hadn't even really used before, is healthy experiences, right? It used to be we were all about safety. Now we're all about safety and health. And, you know, wellness is in there, but I see wellness as being a little bit more longer term than health is. You need to stay healthy on this trip today. And what's interesting is that really was, you know, very tangential, and now it's absolutely core. And I think it's going to be core for absolutely everybody who's traveling now. That's going to be, first is safe. Is it safe to fly on the airlines and stay in these hotels? Next one, will I stay healthy?
Yeah, it's like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be applied over every trip, right? That those absolute fundamentals that we've all taken for granted for so long need to get applied to every trip. The only thing I would add is that I think since previous global issues like global financial crisis, airline revenue management has got so much better. I mean, most aircraft now are leaving with like 1 seat free, and that's apparently the ultimate, because if you've left full, then you didn't put the prices up high enough. So I think airlines are much better at revenue managing and managing demand than they ever have been in the past. And you know, we've got more data and everything available to us to do that. What I would say was a little bit unique in the ash cloud was seeing how people, a little bit like Eric was just describing there around the consolidation, people were so desperate to get over the Atlantic, travel management companies were starting to consolidate volume and then chartering aircraft to get, say, 5 or 6 companies, travelers home. And I remember it vividly because I was stuck on honeymoon in Canada, which most people would say is a really fabulous place to be stuck on your honeymoon. For the ash cloud, it was a little bit difficult. But maybe we will start to see new ways emerging. And I think for those that are ready to start thinking about the future, you know, I think we should all be mindful that there are still people today that are losing their jobs and are in a really, really difficult time. So of course my heart goes out to them, and I really hope we see you the other side. But for those that are ready to start thinking about the future, here's where seeds of opportunity are starting to get sown. And new ways, when I was talking earlier about engaging and listening internally and using this period of preparing for the future, maybe when you review your travel strategy, you'll work out that actually the healthy trip or your people are the #1 priority over anything cost related. For instance, maybe your industry hasn't been that affected. There are some. And so actually coming out of this, you'll need a new set of suppliers, maybe you'll think of your program as a set of microservices that you can go out and buy a series of services that are going to make a difference to your traveler. Or maybe the priority of having one central, that's Siri. I don't know what I said then to start off Siri. I should have turned my phone off, apologies. So yes, whether that will create a set of new microservices, or whether it will just remind you of the importance of having that one conduit, your travel management company, your online booking tool, or your platform TMC. I think we could see this is the moment where it does start to go in 2 directions. That's
fascinating. We are about out of time. Carolyn, Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. It was a fascinating conversation. And with that, I will send it back to Skift and Brian.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Great. So as we jump into our next session, you'll see I just launched a new poll. Do you think suppliers across the country will increase prices and return to prior policies once things return to, quote, normal? So as we look ahead here, please vote on that and see what you think your response might be. Next up, we have a session now. We're jumping into our next interview, Rethinking the Culture of Business Travel Post-COVID-19. This is going to be featuring Rob Graber, President of Agencia, and Skift Senior Travel Tech Editor, Sean O'Neill. So let's wait for this poll here just one moment, and we'll get everybody's video set. So I'm going to end the poll in just a minute here. Great, so I've shared the results, and please join me in welcoming Rob and Sean to this next discussion.
Hello, Rob. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we should just dive right into it. How has Agencia been helping its partners through this crisis?
Yeah, by the way, and thank you for having me. I hope everybody is staying safe and washing your hands and bearing up okay. So at Agencia, it's interesting. We began to see impact in January, in late January, in Hong Kong, in China, businesses where we started to see the impact not only on our business and on our clients, but on our colleagues. So we were pretty active on this relatively early on. In early February, we started to see the impact begin to spread, and we set up essentially a war room structure with 6 cross-functional working groups meeting daily and coordinating also with other teams at Expedia Group. As we moved into March, what we saw is the virus, like everyone else, beginning to spread to different parts of the world, including Europe and North America. And that's where we really saw things begin to intensify. So as that happened, we adopted kind of a follow the sun model with our war room. So we had 24/7 coverage. That was to basically let people ensure that we could serve the needs of customers as they were emerging and handle issues throughout the day. It also was intended to anticipate that some members of our team or of their families might become ill. And so we were able to kind of assure that. So a couple of days before the World Health Organization declared a pandemic, we were working to do things like enhancing our traveler tracker capability, which is part of our duty of care suite, to let our clients and travel managers understand, just be able to sort of draw a circle around the map and understand what was going on in a particular area. Our clients began to approach us with new requests. So we were doing almost 24-hour-a-day hackathons across account management, our clients, our product and technology teams. One example of that is adding a look back capability. So Traveler Tracker was initially built to say, where are my people right now? There's weather over Chicago, there's been an incident in London, whatever. And now clients were needing to know, where were my travelers as this spread began to move across the world? They may be back home now, but were they at risk based on where they were traveling? So this was a 24-hour hackathon with lives at stake, because people, our clients, needed to know where their travelers were to be able to give them guidance about whether or not they needed to seek advice. Then as we moved into March, we saw governments begin to close borders. We shifted into a mode of really helping this intensifying, modifying, canceling trips, enhancing our functionality to be able to do that on more of a bulk basis, optimizing hotel search to filter for flexible cancellation where travelers still needed to be going or on their way home, enhancing our help resources centers, doing a lot of things to help with flexible cancellation policies, letting travelers know when hotels are closed, when they're going to be open, and so forth. So it's been a breathless, traumatic, difficult, but a experience. But I've been incredibly proud of how the teams have responded, how our partners at our supplier partners have responded, how the industry has responded overall. It's been an incredible time.
Yeah, I imagine it's been quite breathless. Thank you, Rob, for that update. We did get an email from an attendee audience question sort of about duty of care. And you mentioned that you guys were sort of having hackathons and stuff to try to do things. This has been the first time duty of care as a concept's really been put to a massive test at scale. What do you feel like this means for how the corporate travel community will be looking at duty of care in the future?
Yeah, I think this has been an unprecedented test and also an unprecedented use case for how we all think about duty of care. I think what Caroline and I think it was Eric were talking about earlier was very, very true. I think it is going to intensify the focus and the value of what travel managers do with inside companies, what travel management companies do, and how the industry really needs to operate. How we think about duty of care, not just as a reporting solution, not just as a real time, but as a holistic practice within the industry. I think it's very important. I think what Eric was alluding to about knowing my driver, knowing my hotel, and so forth. There's a lot of public policy and public health research to support that sort of thing as we begin to emerge. Who has been exposed to COVID-19, who has come through it okay. There's a lot of very mild cases. If you can get the serum-based testing, the blood-based testing to know if you have the antibodies, then you actually can circulate safely yourself. You can also begin to circulate in society safely. That means doctors and hospital workers can be on those front lines without any concern, but with much less risk and so forth. And you can see that in the rest of the economy. So I think, back to duty of care, I think it's going to put more importance on the work that travel managers do, on the work that our supplier partners do, and the work that we do as part of the industry. And it's going to just draw a line under the value of what travel management needs to provide in a world like this.
So that makes sense. So I hear the two sides of it. So this crisis, on the one hand, has really shown that corporate travel can deliver something that a lot of companies may suddenly have an extra appreciation for, duty of care being one of that. So that might increase TMC business. On the other hand, like you were mentioning the conversation before with Eric, Microsoft, a big buyer of travel, they went down to 0, and now they're thinking, well, maybe do we have to go back up to 100%? What amount of travel is frivolous or discretionary, depending on the client? So do you have an overall take on where you see corporate travel going? Our poll at the beginning of the call, the attendees in the webinar, I thought it was going to take a while to sort of rebound.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, I don't look at this as an opportunity for travel management companies or anyone. This is a crisis. We have to respond as an industry, and we will. We are. When I think about what this means for the long term for corporate travel, look, I think travel comes back. I don't think travel goes to 0. I don't think travel comes back at 5%. I think it will take time, but I do believe travel comes back. I think, look, the headlines are scary and dramatic, and they're going to be scary and dramatic for the next month, for the next 2 months. Historically, though, headlines are a bad way to understand long-term trends. They're a very good way to understand current events and short-term, the immediate term. I think what's driven business travel is going to still be true as we emerge from this, but I don't think it's going to be a dramatic recovery overnight. But I do think travel recovers within a pretty close range of where it's been, and I think it will continue to grow. I think it will continue to grow from there.
Okay, you had mentioned some of the tech tools that Agencia has been using. What has been especially handy for you, either in terms of internal ops or how you've been helping your partners through the crisis with your tech tools?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, we think about it less of a tool set. The real value that we've seen is in the platform approach that we've taken. So we were able to, for example, virtualize essentially all of our customer service technology and all of our travel consultants, within a matter of several days, and in cases within hours. And that means that we were able to keep them safe. So rather than if they were working in an office, which we would accommodate social distancing, but at a point where governments were saying, hey, you need to work from home, we were able to mobilize on that very, very rapidly. And that was a huge benefit to not only to our people, but to our customers, who were able to reach the people that they know, that they trust, and able to get the help that they need. And so we were able to enable work from home or virtual support in every country around the world that we do business in, and that was really a fantastic benefit. And so it's less at that kind of feature function level and more kind of the general approach that Agencia has pioneered in the industry from a platform perspective.
Okay, Rob, thanks. That's helpful. How are you thinking about trust across the ecosystem right now? Because a lot of business travelers feel a lot of uncertainty right now. Is there a way that TMC should be thinking about how they should respond to that level of uncertainty or issues of trust?
I think it's a really important question. I think by and large, there have been, if you're on Twitter, if you're following the issues that have come up from a traveler perspective, there have been moments of near drama. Is customers on the leisure side and on the business side have tried to understand what's going on with my plans. Where's my money? How do I cancel? What do I need to do? I think when we take a step back from this in several months, we will look back and see what I hope will be an improvement in trust across the industry. Because when you look at what suppliers have done, when you look at what players like Expedia and Agencia, who I can speak for, have done, it has been all in the service of trying to enhance trust, but more it's been in the service of trying to help our partners, help our travelers, and really work through what has been a breathtaking crisis. I think by and large, people have done the right thing. In these early moments when you saw mass cancellations, there were hotels that responded dramatically and so forth, but really quickly people came around to what's the right thing that we need to do. This is unprecedented. I think as Caroline and Eric said, this is not an industry meant to operate at zero. It's not an industry that's meant to operate in reverse. It's an industry that's built to move forward, but very quickly people recognized what was going on, and I think by and large people did the right thing. The feedback that we're getting from our clients has been really around transparency. We've tried to be very transparent about what's going on, what we know, what we don't know, what we think is going to happen, and then when we're ready to be, when we know more, we're trying to be very clear, very transparent, very proactive about all of those things. I think another thing about trust is a point that I think Caroline was making about travel buyers and how they're thinking about what is important for your business moving forward. How do you think about your travel culture? How do you think about what you actually need from a budgeting perspective? And I think that's going to enhance trust within organizations that might, inside companies, traditionally be at odds between procurement and the travel buying process and the budgeting process and the business. I think it's going to potentially, and I think hopefully will result in a more holistic and a more trust-based discussion as they go forward and think about what they really need and how they think about where they need to invest in travel and where maybe do they move to a more virtual basis.
That's a great point about travel culture, and I want to touch on that again in a moment. But first, you alluded to suppliers, and we haven't really gotten to the supply side of the equation yet. So, no. Airlines obviously crushing situation, hoteliers as well. Is there anything you're hearing when you're talking to your supplier partners about what the strategy forward is in the rebound when it comes to maybe guaranteeing demand, anything in new approaches?
So I think right now our supplier partners, again, I can't speak for them, but I think by and large, they're focused on navigating the next several days, the next several weeks, and the next several months. They're focused on making sure that travelers and customers are okay, that their people are okay, that they are able to manage all of the different issues that they're trying to manage in an orderly way. We've been working very dynamically, very much on a real-time basis to help update policies, to take pressure off of our airline partners and others in the industry from a customer service perspective to say, hey, help us help your internal infrastructure and our mutual customers. So I think that's what is a lot of the focus. I think they're also, especially from an airline perspective, but also the hotels, working with governments to ensure that the travel industry, which is a critical industry, remains ready to step back up as things move into the long term, move out of this kind of short-term mindset and into the long term. I don't think that suppliers are going to be looking to guarantee demand. If I'm understanding the question well, I think they're going to be ramping back in and providing service. You know, we've seen that kind of recovery, probably never at the scale it would be safe to say, but I think they'll be ramping back into that as we come out of the public health dimension of this and think about and start to think about the economic dimension.
Great, thank you, Rob. Yeah, and the poll results show that about half of our attendees are saying they're expecting suppliers to want to keep flexible cancellation policies intact for some time. Is that your guess as well?
I expect that. Look, I think our travel suppliers are going to be very responsive to what customers need. They deeply understand and they're deeply sympathetic, whether it's a business situation or a leisure trip or whatever it is. They're deeply sympathetic and deeply attuned to what customers need. I think we all are in this moment because we're all feeling those same anxieties. So I think when it comes to offering flexibility, when it comes to offering clarity on what capabilities exist and so forth, I think that there is going to be that that increased focus on flexibility, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay. So Rob, Agencia last July said that you were building a hotel rate assurance technology. Is that continuing to be a focus now?
It is. It's less of a focus right now from a from a market perspective, but in terms of the long-term priorities that we have as a company, those things aren't going to change. In the short term, our priorities have absolutely changed. We have been swarming over particular issues, particular needs from customers, particular needs from our supplier partners, and we're going to stay on those topics. We won't stop until all of those issues are addressed. But the long-term focuses for us are not going to change. Right now, we're committed to helping our customers get back to normal operations, our partners absolutely as soon as possible. But in the long term, helping make sure that our clients and our travelers can find great value, that our supplier partners can offer great value, is absolutely going to be a focus for us, and that will still be part of our portfolio, and it'll be that way for a long time to come.
Before getting back to the crisis, one thing, last fall, Expedia Group, the parent company, got a deal with Marriott in order to be able to get some great wholesale rates and bring them in. And Agencia was going to benefit from that. Is that something that is still you see on the path for 2020?
So our deal with Marriott from a corporate perspective was a really great partnership. It was a win-win for the two companies. The work that we were doing with Marriott from a wholesale perspective was really at a strategic level, not just about getting wholesale rates just for us, but really helping Marriott assert control and better clarity and transparency over how those rates were being distributed across the industry. That partnership is going to continue to move forward. Again, I think right now, all of us are focused on the immediate needs of our travelers, of our partners, to make sure that people are safe and clear and able to weather the storm. But we'll absolutely continue to move forward with that relationship and the promise of it as we move out of this period of time.
Okay, and let's wrap up then with the question about travel culture, which you alluded to before. The entire idea of how corporates are going to be thinking about this and how TMCs need to respond and sort of match and be in sync mentally with where their customers are. How do you see that shaking out? How can TMC sort of assuage the fears of some corporate partners?
I think when we think about travel culture, we think about a couple of things. First, companies have been thinking before this crisis about the digitalization of their enterprises, and you see the changing expectations of employees, of colleagues within businesses, resulting in the change of capabilities inside those same companies. So whether it's Slack or Dropbox or Workday, the changing way that companies are thinking about what they offer to their colleagues as an internal experience is an important part of what it means to have a great company. And when it comes to travel, I think that's one of the reasons that Agencia's offerings have resonated so deeply for so many years. And I think that travel culture, the culture within organizations, is going to continue to be a very important. And I think this is, again, not in this moment, but especially as we go forward, is going to be more and more important. Number one. Number two, our research has shown, the research that the Harvard Business Review has shown, that business travel directly impacts business performance. Now, in this immediate term where we're doing this on Zoom rather than on a stage somewhere, it's easy to be cynical about that. But again, I think the headlines are, historically, headlines have been a poor way to understand long-term trends, great way to understand current events. But if you look at what has driven the value of business travel and the ability to work and collaborate on a global basis, it's been enhanced by technologies like the ones that we're using, by email, by dynamic messaging technology and so forth. But it's been driven by the ability to travel and connect and move people and products and ideas around the world at essentially zero cost and then essentially in real time. So I don't think those things are going to go away. I think they're going to continue to be an important part of the economy and an important part of how we all work and do business. And I think that's in the long run a very good thing for travel.
Okay, Rob, well, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for sharing everything that's been going on with Agencia. Stay safe and stay well there. And we're going to go now to Jeffrey Reiskamp from Medallia. My colleagues will introduce him. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody. As a reminder, we are recording today's online seminar. If you need to watch it later, if you're going to have to jump. We also have questions via hashtag Skift Summit on Twitter. So we'll be fielding those and taking those as we are able. Next up, we have a session presented by Medallia, which will examine how travel brands can better listen to business travelers in this time of crisis. Please join me in welcoming Global Head of Hospitality at Medallia, Jeffrey Reiskamp, and Skift Research Editor, Jeremy Cressman.
Hey, everyone. Just to give a quick intro to this session, just to set things up for everybody. I think everybody would agree that coronavirus has really created this unprecedented degree of uncertainty for those businesses that are serving the corporate travel sector. And I think with that uncertainty and disruption, there are now numerous questions about how those of us that serve corporate travel should react to that. There's questions like, what do business travelers actually need at this moment? Or how should our organizations adapt messaging or gathering feedback from this audience? And then also, what does this mean for how our businesses should serve this community moving forward? So to help make sense of this challenging moment, we have Jeff Reiskamp with us today from Medallia. Jeff, first of all, welcome to Skift's first online summit about business travel. Really excited to have you here.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having us. And really also, I just wanted to note, I've appreciated the coverage Skift has provided through this. Certainly been a long-time reader of Skift, but the coverage during this, as this has unfolded the last few weeks, has been really, really helpful from our perspective, and I know for a lot of the companies we work with.
Absolutely, that's great to hear. Well, so Jeff, we've already talked a lot today from our first two sessions about how companies should be adapting or rethinking their business travel in the face of what's happening right now with COVID-19. But I guess I wanted to ask about something that is a deceptively simple question or even a simple activity, which is just listening to customers. That would seem like it's such a simple thing, but why is listening such an important thing for organizations to be doing right now in business travel?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think as others have shared here, we've kind of found ourselves just flung into this world of uncertainty here. There's not really a playbook for this, and what we're seeing on the news is, the health systems and the hospitals are trying to navigate this, and even they don't really know what's going on. So how would we expect somebody we hired to work at the front desk to understand how to handle this, 3 months in. So what we're seeing, I think, across the board is just a high degree of innovation and learning on the fly across the board. And I think that there is some great guidance that's coming, but the key here is just learning from this and making sure that guests are participating in the feedback process. And what do I mean when I talk about that? I mean, today Medallia works with 7 out of the 10 largest hotel companies in the world, the major airlines, rental car companies, et cetera, just collecting millions and millions of data points and signals from customers. And we first started seeing some of the initial signals were coming out in January. Like some of the others had said, we started seeing this in China. I mean, today now we're, I think, at 3/4 of America sheltering at home or staying at home, whatever the word that your locality is using. And when this was quickly ramping up, we found people didn't really have the answers, but what we were able to find and our customers were able to find is that they could learn from the regions that were impacted and then apply those to other areas of their operation as this horrible thing has started to spread a little bit more. And we talk about those signals from customers in a lot of different ways, whether it's observed behavior, direct feedback. There's a lot of ways that your customers are talking to you today. And what we found is that the customers do want to continue talking to us, which is great news. Historically in hospitality, when things are well, we find about a 20 to 30% response rate across the board. So what are we finding? I think this inconsistency that sometimes is occurring can work to the advantage of a broad operation. In the face of uncertainty, sometimes things that that hotels or airline companies are doing out in the field is working quite well and can be used and then greater applied at scale. So that's I think the biggest thing. And then where everybody's going to be several months from now when we're finally past this is the big question of what do we actually learn from this? So listening to your customers now will provide a lot of the feedback for that once we get to that point.
Interesting. Related to listening, I think, is what you do with that information, what you get back from customers, right? And I think that plays into this question of messaging. A lot of companies are struggling right now to figure out, what do I say to my customers? And, you and I were talking last week about some of the downright strange messages, frankly, that we're seeing from different travel brands. The situation is changing so rapidly. Companies are trying to figure out what they should be saying. Companies that I don't necessarily even need to hear from are sending me messages about coronavirus. How can good listening actually ensure that organizations are putting things in context and communicating with customers the right way at this really difficult moment?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Jeremy. I mean, so at Medallia, 10 to 15% of our customer base is hospitality. So we work across several different industries across the board. And I think what's happening and what we've all observed as customers is that there's a lot of telling and less asking that's going on. So to your point, I mean, I've heard from everybody from my dry cleaner to our banks and everybody in between about the approach. And a lot of this is just kind of turning into white noise. And it is just like this telling thing. And that can be very helpful in certain contexts. But I think that what we've found again and again is that customers will tell you what they need in this time. If you offer them the listening post or the opportunity to give that. And you don't really need to apologize for asking about an experience either. I think that could be an area where people are a little bit, tentative, saying, hey, we realize the world has changed. Does it still make sense to engage with our customers? And the thing is, this is just central to the fabric of how hospitality works. It's why when you check out from a hotel, you expect the front desk agent to say, how is everything with your stay? It's just kind of like part of the transactional process. And that feedback is often, expected here. So this open dialogue with customers, across digital, physical, and really employee channels is already in place for probably the most sophisticated, companies that we work with. But now it's about changing the tone of that messaging and making sure it's relevant for your operations and also for the guest who's staying with you. And the thing is, if you actually start to take away some of those listening channels, your guests or your customers will find other ways to provide that anyway. So, guests want to be part of that dialogue. So they'll either go to higher cost channels that are already really challenged right now, such as call centers, or perhaps more public channels such as social sources. So we've also seen that as well. I mean, where you take away the direct dialogue, in many cases, people are going elsewhere. It kind of goes back to that adage that I sometimes talk to many of our customers about it. And that's, we don't really choose the channels, our customers do. It's up to them where they want to provide the dialogue with you.
Right. They're going to find a way to get in touch with you, whether you like it or not. So based on what you've been seeing in market the past few weeks, this is a summit about business travel. Do you think that the companies that are serving or catering to business travelers have taken this mantra of listening to heart? Like, would you say they're doing a good job of it?
Yeah, I think generally in hospitality, I think that, we found some companies kind of learning as they go, but I think that what we found is that, the best organizations are taking that level of empathy and understanding. There are some cases where this isn't working well. We have had some isolated cases where, there were some customers who are kind of shutting down areas where they're starting to listen to their guests. And it's interesting because in some of those cases, it's kind of like akin to, not looking at your P&L because the revenue's not coming in. So yes, there's different kind of feedback right now, and there's a different way that, your guests are interacting with you as a brand, perhaps on different channels. But listening and understanding and learning is more important now than during a more stable time. And I think that's the thing that I've seen a lot of companies do well. I mean, there's a couple of examples that I would share. I mean, just look at Delta Airlines website, and their messaging that they have put out there is just, really, really phenomenal. Putting guests as the priority and the passengers that fly with them on a regular basis, kind of this, we're here when you need us, or when you're ready message. And I think one of the other ones, a lot of us have seen the message that Marriott's CEO, Arne Sorensen, put out, kind of this humble address that was widely viewed by not only their employees, but their guests, very direct messaging. And I thought it was very much hit the tone. I mean, for us, what we think this is about, this dialogue should remain the one that's calm, visible, available, share what's happening. And really the best cases are the companies that are quickly learning, and then they're iterating and adjusting operations based on what they're finding from the field.
Yeah. You mentioned the Arne Sorensen video. That was something we widely discussed within the Skift team too. I thought that was a great example of how to speak as a leader to the industry. It was a great example. So on this point about giving feedback, receiving feedback, iterating on it, are there specific types of metrics, Jeff, that, or maybe it's even like moments in the traveler journey that are especially important to be tracking right now? Should we be looking at people's feedback? I mean, no one's really traveling right now, but like, what are the signals that we should be tracking most closely as we figure out, how to get our messaging strategy right and, how to react to what's happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've had this conversation with probably about 30 companies over the last 2 weeks. And it's really just making sure, like, what is the point of what we're doing and how are we making sure that this is effectively being heard out there? We encourage really that organizations take a step back from broadcasting traditional metrics at a time like this, whether it's, a net promoter score, customer effort scores, overall satisfaction, et cetera. Employees are under a lot of stress right now as it is. And these metrics can all be observed after the fact. Like, we can look at this as kind of a general barometer of how we did. But I think the key here is just making sure that we're valuing that the customers are heard and giving them a spot to provide that feedback. I think that a lot of this is going to be unstructured feedback that comes in rather than just the traditional numeric tracking type of things that some companies, use more of. I think that this unstructured feedback and then having a way of analyzing and understanding it is where you're really going to get the best ideas on how to, adjust and how to change things during this time and how to address specific customer needs. I mean, this stuff can vary quite a bit, region by region as well. And I think the other thing is also, from a metric standpoint, being where your customers are, they're kind of shifting the way that they interact with you as a brand right now. If they're not necessarily getting onto airplanes as much or checking into hotels as much, I mean, your customers are still out there. So it's just making sure you're tracking on the right platforms.
Yeah. I mean, the last point you made, I think, is a really good one. A lot of business travelers have essentially hit the pause button right now. And, typically in a listening environment, you'd be able to go out and get all these signals. You'd have feedback of people staying at hotels, being on planes, sending messages to customer service. But with no one traveling, at least in the short term, what does a good listening strategy look like when you don't have those usual business as normal signals? Like, what does anticipatory listening look like as we think about the future, like what we want to do moving forward?
Yeah, this is, Jeremy, you make a good point. And I think this has been really an interesting one for us because, I mean, at Medallia, we're processing millions and millions of pieces of signals and feedback, every single day. In hospitality, we've definitely seen that decline in some cases, right? Because there's just fewer transactions that are occurring. There's fewer experiences that are taking place. And that kind of raises the question, right? If you have very few or no customers right now, how do you better understand what they're doing? And the reality is the customers are still there. They're just not interacting with us or, on those normal channels that we're used to. Leading up to this, I mean, we were, really in great times in the hospitality industry. And I've had a lot of conversations, across the industry about this between experience part of the customer journey. Like this idea of, okay, after somebody checks out from our resort or, on their way back from Las Vegas, how do we get them back? Like, how do we get them to have this great experience again? And I think now it's kind of shifted to between travel for everybody, right? I mean, it's sort of, we're all in this between experience today. And where does that leave us? I think the digital channels are obviously where our customers are still interacting. And I think for a lot of people that meant a change of travel plans right now. I mean, most Americans now are living their transactional lives entirely online right now. So your digital experience is your experience in most cases right now, even if that wasn't really the primary channel that a customer interacted with you in the past, because call centers are pretty backed up right now, and that's how they need to. So so one company that we've been working with learned kind of right away that the digital feedback around their modified cancellation policy wasn't really working. It was confusing guests. So there's a lot of changes that are rapidly happening across the board at many companies, and you need to understand if that's resonating and making sense to guests, and they're able to complete the things that they need to with you on the channels where you still do have a customer interaction taking place. I think the other thing that's pretty big is the messaging side of it. We talk a lot about social distancing, and we hear a lot about it on the news and whatnot, and I think there's just a greater reliance on that mobile feedback during a stay. Through platforms like Zingle, where you can interact and maybe you wouldn't feel as comfortable going down to the front desk. And then finally, the voice of employees on the front line are such a big part of this. Asking the right questions to the right populations are so key to getting through this together. I mean, your employees are observant and they're seeing things before many of the folks at the corporate office are. So making sure you have a way to get that information up is so important.
I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Can you tell me any, provide any examples, actionable examples of how people are turning their listening strategies right now into, concrete strategies?
Yeah, this has been an interesting one to see too. I mean, with operations shifting on the fly, there's a few that we've seen that have been really interesting. And in one operation that we work with, they found out right away that their customers felt more comfortable when their employees on the front line were using face masks to protect themselves, particularly in the most customer-facing areas. And this started showing up in parts of...
Which sector?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hospitality brand? Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, this was in the hotel space, and we started seeing it in Asia, and then it was used as kind of a canary in the coal mine for other parts of the operation where this was rolled out, these types of protocols, understanding where this kind of protocol would be most impactful to guests, et cetera. There's also a lot of learning happening on digital that I mentioned as well. A lot of activity around sort of the check-in process at airlines, for example, making sure distancing is appropriate and it feels right for the customer. More visibility and wiping down services that customers would use frequently, such as touch screens. So these types of findings, learning them quickly from your guests by listening, and then rolling them out and making sure they're deployed in the right region. That's been the thing that's been really interesting to us to see at Medallia. It's happening across, not only hospitality, but quite a bit in retail as well. Just changing on the fly.
Well, listen, Jeffrey, this has been a great conversation. I just want to wrap things up by mentioning that you guys have an upcoming event, much like we're doing a virtual event, you guys are doing a virtual event as well. Can you quickly tell us about that before we wrap things up?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We bring together, thousands of customer experience leaders from across industries, a big presence from hospitality as well every year. And usually this is an in-person summit. Now it's virtual and it's completely complimentary. So we're expecting, several people to join. Just go to our website to learn a little bit more about that. You're all welcome, and we hope it's a very valuable learning experience for those that participate. We're really looking forward to it.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jeff. We really appreciate your time today, and thank you to Medallia for joining us. I thought this was great.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Jeremy.
Great. Thank you, everybody. You'll see that I've launched another poll. So we're asking a question. Do you think we will see far stricter regulation in corporate travel policy decisions post-COVID-19? So we're trying to understand there, to what degree we'll see stricter regulation. So I'll let you guys vote. Just a reminder again, we are recording this and we will send it out to everybody post this recording, post this session. So next up, we're going to be discussing assuaging the fear of the corporate traveler with Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at American Express Global Business Travel, Xian Kim, along with Skift Corporate Travel Editor, Matthew Parsons. So please join me in welcoming both of them to this discussion.
Hey, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Hi, Xian.
Hi, how are you, Matt?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Pleased to be here with you today.
Cool. Good stuff. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate the time. So we've got just 20 minutes to go through quite a lot, I imagine. So I'm just going to jump right into these questions, if that's okay. But I thought, we start off with be really useful for everyone listening to have a bit of background about you, about Amex GBT in terms of the number of clients you're looking after, and the kind of sectors that you're specializing in. So just as a background, if you could introduce yourself and talk about the company.
Thank you so much. As Chief Risk and Compliance Officer of American Express Global Business Travel, I run the Global Risk Management and Regulatory Compliance Department at GBT, as well as lead the environmental, social, and governance mission. For those who don't know, GBT has more than 18,000 employees around the world in over 140 countries. We have more than 9,000 customers, from the largest global companies to mid-market and small, medium enterprise businesses. And we manage more than $35 billion in total business travel sales.
Cool, okay, thanks. So, we're here to talk about fear, or rather how to address that fear, how you can put corporations at ease, how you can put travelers at ease as well, both now and then also when we're on the other side. Before we come to that, I just want to jump into a really quick question about one of the earlier polls. The first poll said, 60% of the people who are on this seminar think that business is going to come back within a few months. For me, that was quite shocking. What was your reaction to that when you saw that? Just very quickly.
Well, these are truly unprecedented times, and our business travel volume has been down significantly. And while we are hopeful that the volumes will return towards the later part of this year, we are preparing for the fact that we're not going to see a swift recovery. That's just the reality of the way we are trying to assess the situation that we're in, although it's very hard to predict how long the COVID situation is going to last.
Yeah, okay. I thought I'd ask that one before it slipped my mind. So yeah, we're talking about assuaging the fear, corporate travelers, and I thought we could do a bit of a past, present, and future here. So we're just gonna, if I can start with just kind of going back in time a few weeks, a couple of months. What happened at Amex GBT? Obviously, a large company. When the virus spread, can you give us a breakdown? What was it? What was it like? Was it slow motion? As Eric was saying earlier, just now, how did it pan out for you?
Yeah, I remember specifically, it was mid-January when we started monitoring the situation in China as a local incident. About a week later, we formally invoked our regional incident management response plan. And later we escalated this to a global incident management response as the epidemic started to spread in Europe and the Middle East. One of the most important things when you are navigating uncharted waters is making sure that your goals and your objectives are very clear. So with respect to our incident management response, we established very quickly two primary and equally critical goals. One, the safety and security of our employees, and the second, providing extraordinary support to our clients so they can care for the safety and security of their employees who are our travelers. So in the past several weeks, if I think about it, we supported hundreds of thousands of travelers with their rebookings, cancellations, refunds, and repatriations. In one case, we helped 150 consultants get home from Saudi Arabia in a 24-hour period. A lot of people talked about data earlier, but we pull forward booking data for our clients so they can proactively anticipate and plan their next steps. In a way, it's almost easier now with the world on global lockdown, but early on when there were rolling travel bans being issued every night, having dynamic and real-time data was very critical. And we analyzed government travel bans and entry restrictions, which we share with our clients, as well as flight disruptions and cleaning and disinfectant procedures. And now we started actually sharing information with respect to flights that carried COVID-confirmed patients, down to which row that they sat in so that our customers can inform any impacted employees. Now, all of this obviously is possible due to our global footprint, our strong relationship with the airlines and the hotels, our technology and data analytics capabilities. But at the center of all of this, I would say, is our incident management response as a constant state of mind. You know, whether you're talking about a minor flight delay due to unexpected weather patterns or global pandemics, crisis management is actually at the heart and DNA of a travel management company, and it's integral to our risk management program. And it's really during these times of challenge, whether small or large, that I believe a TMC can demonstrate its value.
Okay, I mean, Amex GBT is a big company. You're looking after big companies as well. From an operational perspective, was your sheer size perhaps a disadvantage in this? I mean, wasn't it an operational nightmare to kind of coordinate all of these repatriations or just keep people informed? I mean, was it a struggle at times from a compliance perspective?
I don't think it was a struggle. I think actually our size and scale was something that benefited us the most because we had early information from our suppliers, whether the airlines or the hotels. We had global technologies and capabilities to pull the data very quickly, as well as we were able to communicate and operate through our joint ventures, as well as our travel partner network, and reach our customers very quickly. So okay, I do believe that it was actually an advantage.
Okay, so you think you were agile enough as a organization? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and obviously, this is, you hear the word unprecedented all the time now. It's, it's a unique event and it's obviously ongoing. What kind of lessons have you learned so far from this? And are there any lessons you can actually pass on to your clients and the travelers so far?
One thing that I would say, because I get a lot of questions related to policies, is that policies need to be flexible during times like this and not static. So today's decision may be different from yesterday's, and tomorrow's decision could be different again. And this is because the facts are constantly evolving. And the government restrictions, and those can change overnight. You can wake up the next morning and get a call from your landlord about a suspected COVID case in your office building. Having said that, I'm not trying to tell you to rip up your old policy and start a new one, but rather than a static or prescriptive policy that almost becomes immediately outdated when you have a situation like this, what you need is a clear framework that will allow you to be nimble and flexible without creating chaos or confusion. And this is what you should have already had in place, pandemic or no pandemic. But if you don't have one yet, this is what a framework needs to look like. First, you need to define your triggers. What's the level 1, 2, or level 3 incident? What's the local, regional incident? And when do you escalate to a global incident? Second, you need to define the team. This is the cross-functional and cross-regional representatives that will make the informed decisions. You're probably going to have people from internal and external comms, security, commercial operations, risk, compliance, technology, HR, of course. But you don't want to be scrambling last minute to try to figure out who's on the team and who's the team leader. These folks should know who they are, and they need to know what their role is. And third, you make sure that you empower the decision-making to this team. When we stood up our Asia Pacific Regional Incident Management Response Team, we had people from Sweden, Norway, the UK, everyone had an opinion as to how this should be run. And it's great to get input and feedback, even if you're talking about a China-based local incident as it was initially. There does obviously have global impact because we are a global company and everyone travels around the world. But at the end of the day, if you have the right people in the right forum, you need to make sure that they are the ones that are making the decisions and you have empowered them with the decision-making authority. And then last, I would just say you need to understand your company culture and have clear principles that will guide you in all of your decision-making.
Okay, so you're talking very much about crisis management. A lot of companies will have been caught out. Did you experience any of your clients that were really caught out by this, with perhaps staff dispersed all over the world? I mean, was there anyone who's kind of, you really picked up on some bad practice when it comes to business continuity? Were there any kind of standout companies that weren't well prepared?
Well, all companies were quite different. And that goes back to what I kind of, said about, your company's culture and understanding the principles, whereby you'll make the decisions. If you think about a consulting company that sends, folks all over the world, to metropoles such as New York, Hong Kong, London, compared to an oil and gas company that are sending people to an oil rig to do work for several months at a time, there are going to be very different cultures as well as business needs for the travel. And it was quite critical during these times that we sat through with our clients to understand what their business goals were, what they were trying to achieve, so that we can help them think through the situations and come up with the best response. Because at the end of the day, we have a lot of benchmarking information and we can help them out. So I wouldn't say that any particular company was caught out or not prepared, but it was a time for companies to really think through what are their goals, what are their business goals, what are their needs, and are they of the culture where they're going to freeze all travel immediately, or while following WHO and CDC guidelines and perhaps introducing additional sanitary measures or restrictions, are you going to try to keep your folks on the road and your offices open as long as possible? There's no right or wrong answer to it, but you have to think through who you are and what you're representing and what your business goals are.
Okay, so get that framework in place. During the kind of build up to this seminar, we had some really interesting questions submitted during the registration process. And one of them is a great question, which I'll read to you now. Is the travel industry will rebound as it always has after every crisis? But similar to how flying was never the same post 9/11, what will be the lasting ramifications of COVID-19 in terms of risk and compliance? So obviously, flights were affected in a big way after the 9/11 attacks. What's going to be the COVID-19 moments, do you think? What's going to change the way things are done? How will things differ in the future?
A few things, I sometimes believe that we're living in a world of false security, and those things I believe will change. So I lived in Hong Kong for 5 years after the SARS epidemic. And as long as I've ever known the Hong Kong airport, there was thermal scanning. So you get off the flight, and as you walk in, you walk along the long hallway, and then you get towards, passport control, everyone has to pass thermal scanning. And I've never failed, so I don't know what happens if you have a fever and, you're walking through and they take you aside. But the healthcare officials are there on site, making sure that they're monitoring everyone coming in. And I have to imagine that measures like that at airports will become a lot more common in the future.
Yeah, okay. Cool. And we had another question just kind of coming up constantly at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it relates back to the fear factor that business travelers may have. What happens when, even though you've got robust governance in place, You've got that framework you were talking about earlier. How do you actually ease the fears? I mean, if a traveller suddenly says, "Look, I'm not too sure about this. Why am I the first one going back out to this country on the plane?" Would they have a right to kind of refuse to travel in the future, do you think?
I think it's not so different than what we discussed earlier with respect to the risk management framework as we were implementing some of these travel restrictions and procedures. I think you apply the same principles and decision making that you use during the pandemic as you relax the restrictions. And if you've gained your employees' trust during the pandemic with proper governance and principled decision making, that you are looking out for their best interests, you'll have their trust as they get back on the road as well. Now, every company is different, as I said before. Consulting companies will be different from oil and gas companies, as well as, it's about the destinations that you're traveling to. But at the end of the day, if you make sure that you have empathy and very, very good communication with your employees and make sure that they're understanding how you're coming to these decisions, and that the employees know that you've got their backs, I think that you should be in a good place.
Yeah, okay. Just going back to the poll results, so I'm just going to read them again. Will we see far stricter regulation in corporate travel policy decisions post COVID-19? So 53, so just over half, said yes. Companies will explore some policy improvements, but it won't be sweeping changes. That came in at 46%. Are you surprised perhaps that it's not a stronger result for yes, there will be more policy changes as a result of this? I mean, at the moment it's 53%. Are you surprised by that?
Actually, I think that goes back to what I said earlier. Probably more companies than not actually have a framework to make the right decisions, whether you're in a pandemic, or someone mentioned Arctic ash before, or SARS epidemic, which was more localized, more regional, or 9/11 situation. If you have the right framework for making decisions, getting the right stakeholders together to the right gates and make the right decisions, I don't think you need to make sweeping changes to your overall policy framework. And maybe that's what we're seeing here.
Okay, so for some companies, business as usual, despite what's happened. Yeah, okay.
Hi guys.
Hey Ariel, we're going to come on to you in a few minutes. I think we're just wrapping up here.
Okay.
So thanks for hanging on there. This is a back-to-back interview, so looking forward to talking shortly. Sean, I just want to kind of wrap up things very briefly. I'll obviously ask you for any sort of closing thoughts, but another area we're kind of looking at Skift, and again, this is coming up in conversations a lot, when perhaps looking too far ahead, but when things do return to normality, what are governments going to do? Are they going to say, right, business travelers are going to be the first back on the planes, or are they going to turn to the tourists, the holiday makers? Do you think they're going to be so desperate, after all this confinement and, Zoom conferencing and all that kind of thing, they're going to want to get out there? What's your kind of view on how different countries will react to getting back out there again? Will it be business travelers or will it be tourists?
I don't think the governments really differentiate between business travelers and tourists. I don't think that I'll see, that we will see that kind of distinction as the travel restrictions become relaxed. We do draw confidence from the pattern of history. Travel has always been resilient. It powers the economy. We oftentimes talk about the fact that it's a $7 trillion industry that employs 1 out of 10 people all around the world. So we do believe that demand will return. But we're also aware, especially here at GBT, that there will be a new normal set after this crisis. Mm-hmm. There will be major disruptors, and there will also be unique transformational opportunities. And we're watching these trends very carefully. One of our shareholders, BlackRock, stated recently that companies survive this crisis will be the ones that you will be looking to as role models. Now, I like that a lot because some companies may think that values are a luxury during tough times, But if you lose your corporate culture during challenging times, you may never get it back. And we believe it's absolutely critical to uphold our values, that we always do the right thing by our employees, by our customers, and further for our society and community. And based on this brand promise, that we've always got your back, that we believe that we'll be able to embrace these transformational opportunities and come out even stronger.
Okay, so very much a case of practice what you preach. That's the way you're looking at this, yeah?
Absolutely.
Okay, great stuff. I think we're just about out of time with that one. So I just want to say thank you for kind of sharing your insight into what's been happening behind the scenes at Amex GBT.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Thank you very much. And I think we're going to switch briefly back to Brian before we carry on with Ariel. So
yes,
thank you.
Thank you both. So for our final discussion today, we will discuss duty of care, how to proceed now with CEO and co-founder of TripActions, Ariel Cohen, and Skift corporate travel editor, Matthew Parsons. So please join me in welcoming both of them for this discussion.
Hi guys, how are you?
Hi Ariel. Thanks for joining us. We need a kind of virtual round of applause, don't we? Some virtual clapping effects. So we're trying to work those into the next one because it kind of feels like it's missing that. Right. So yeah, like I said, we've got a back-to-back interview. So welcome, Ariel. It's great to have you here. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Obviously, really challenging times for the industry. But in an interesting way, you just talked about this virtual, hand clapping, and we've been doing a lot of Teams meetings using Zoom, and I think in a lot of ways that's what makes me optimistic about business travel, because at the end, what we are doing right now is a nice workaround for these times, but it's not necessarily the most effective way to meet and have a conference, right? And you are missing the hand clapping and the energy and the level of interest that people can get when they meet face to face. So that's why I truly believe that once the health crisis is done, you'll see business travel getting back to normal.
Yeah. Okay. Again, we talked to Sean just then, and again, to put things into perspective, to carry out this, we've got 20 minutes. Again, if you could just give us a little introduction about yourself, and then also a snapshot of TripActions, the number of clients you're serving, what kind of corporates, what kind of sectors and sizes we're talking about, so we know where you're coming from.
Sure. So first of all, a little bit about myself. I live in Palo Alto. This is where I am right now. Been actually a road warrior throughout my career. Which led me to start TripActions. Me and my co-founder really, were users of the various platforms that are out there. And we've decided that we want to create something better that really utilizes the technology and specifically all of the things that you can get from a cloud infrastructure. And that's what TripActions is all about. We have today close to 4,000 corporate customers. Among them, you can find, interestingly enough, you can find Zoom as a customer there, Lyft, guys like Crate and Barrel, Okta, PagerDuty, Concentrix. So various, I would say, customers, usually the thinking customers, customers that really adopted the digital transformation as a way of life, which I actually think that right now, it's becoming very important. We can talk about it more, but I can hardly see how if you're using a non-cloud solution for anything, not just travel, for anything, how you can actually have a true business continuity in your organization. So I think you're going to see a huge acceleration of people adopting cloud systems and doing a digital transformation much faster.
Yeah, it's the new normal. I was talking to Sean before, the kind of, it's interesting to ask people how they kind of live through the initial outbreak of the virus. And I don't know if you could just tell me a little bit about, your immediate reaction, both from a personal perspective with your team and TripActions, and then after that, if you talk a little bit about how you reacted on a corporate level, whether it's product development or rolling out new tools.
Yeah, so first of all, we are a data-driven company, so we could actually see at the beginning the slow decline of booking, and already kind of getting a heads up that something is going to the wrong direction, even before the headlines and all of this started. And then we've decided, before we even started to ask ourselves around okay, what does it mean from a headcount perspective, and I'm going to touch this in a second. We asked a very simple question: how can we make sure that our customers can actually operate in this new environment? I'll remind everybody that at the beginning there were places that had outbreaks and places that didn't, right? So business travel needed to kind of have a certain continuity, when business travel managers needed to have visibility. And because the Trip Actions platform is based on data, we could actually at that point correlate the data that came from the CDC of where you see outbreaks, and then the data that came from our system, where the travelers are, where they are going to be, where they've been. Like even a week ago, it was very important, because then you could tell them, hey, if you've been to Italy, don't come to the office right now. That was 3 weeks ago. And we've released over a weekend an entire functionality around how to manage your travel while you have an outbreak that is kind of not even. It's kind of going in different places in the world in different ways. I also believe that that would be the future, right? In 2 months from now, 3 months from now, I don't think that the most optimistic people think that it will just clear out completely. So you'll need to have tools, technology that relies on data, give you as a business travel manager insights, and then the ability to act upon them. And this is really, what we've done. So that was part of our focus.
Yeah.
And the other important thing, we knew that if travel will get canceled very fast, which it has, especially of the week that the US canceled most of the trips from Europe, we will need to really do two things: mobilize our call center to work from home. That's one thing. And the other thing, we'll need to support of all our customers. So this is where, running on a cloud platform is so important. It took us exactly a minute to tell all of the support team, stay home. You're going to continue to support our travelers from home. And that was really, really powerful.
Yeah. Okay. So before I talked with Sean about risk, and I think, the focus of our conversation is very much about duty of care. And you mentioned before, you kind of rolled out, you talked about data, historic data. Have you been to Italy, or I guess other destinations within the last 2 weeks? Do you think other travel management companies or other corporates were able to use that kind of data to assess the safety of their staff, or do you think that's a kind of a unique take you had on it?
So our customers specifically, this is probably the most popular feature that we've ever released. We've released this feature over a weekend. It became, some customers actually told us that they were doing a daily stand-up, looking at the dashboard and taking actions. Part of the actions was the ability to cancel all trips to a certain region at once. Part was to communicate with the employee. We have a chat built in our product. And we have location, right? So you could actually know where the employee is and tell him what to do. I think that if you are not running on a technology platform, right, a real platform that was basically developed in the last few years, it is not likely that you will be able to achieve it, right? It's not that you couldn't provide something. I'll give you an example. Everybody are talking about the duty of care, and I'm actually insisting of calling it a business travel continuity. And the reason that I'm doing it, I think the duty of care and the type of solutions that are out there are very, very important. They were important a month ago, and they're going to be very important in a month from now. But this is one, I would say, even feature of the entire problem. What you want to offer to business travel managers is the ability to constantly manage travel, where there is maybe a health crisis, there could be other crises. Yeah. And I think most of the duty of care systems were designed to, there is an event, it started and ended, what do we do now, right? Which is important, you need to have it. But you need to have much more, I would say, holistic approach to how to manage business travel in the new era.
Yeah, okay. So again, you're a kind of a tech-focused platform. You've got 4,000 clients. We just talked about historic data. Were there any other questions that managers were coming to you with? Were they saying, look, we need any kind of rollouts or features that they urgently required, any kind of themes?
Yeah. So first of all of them, we started proactively by releasing the dashboard. And then we started to talk with our customer advisory board of what other features do they want. And because we have a really, really quick turnaround, we can release stuff in matters of hours, right? We basically heard their feedback, designed from our perspective, what does it mean, and released. So in a week time frame, we moved from version 1 to version 3 by iterating, by adding more features and more capabilities. And in fact, the entire Trip Actions team right now, when you think about, we have a pretty big R&D team, a pretty big product team, what they're doing right now, they're developing the functionality for a month from now, 2 months, 3 months from now, where people will get back to work. And we have 2 assumptions there. One, that they will need to really have an ability to decide where to send the employees, which areas they can actually, it's safe to send employees for. But also they will be very cautious about the budget. They will want to know that this specific trip is really important from a business perspective. And all of this is actually will come out from Trip Actions as functionality features that again is based on data that we always had in the platform. The insights that you can make out of it, it's relevant for safety, but it's also relevant for budget management. And therefore the action. Can you take the trip or not? Do I want to cancel the trip? Maybe I've just approved the trip right now, but in a week from now, the situation has changed there and I want to cancel the trip, right? Maybe the traveler is already there and I want him to act in a certain way. So all of these features, functionality, this is what our team is doing right now.
Yeah. Okay. Going back to the poll we had at the start of these conversations, 53% believe there will be stricter regulations coming in very quickly. 46% saying not that soon. Do you think the rule book's going to be ripped up when it comes to duty of care? Do you think there's going to be a lot more? They're going to get stricter. Companies get stricter with travel approvals and that kind of thing.
I think that first of all, the answer is yes. You will see a change in the way that business travel works, and it will be much more strict, definitely on the short period of time, because you do have 2 challenges here. You do have the health crisis challenge, and you'll have a budget challenge. So on the immediate term, I believe that you will see less travel, less business travel. But then people will need to manage their businesses. People will need to make sure that the economy is growing. I'll give you an example. If I want to open an office right now in a certain region, because I think that maybe we can have a lot of new customers there, it would be much harder for me to do it without having the ability to actually physically travel to this region. And these are the challenges that every business will have. You will need to continue to manage your travel. In a lot of ways, I think it's very similar. I know that people are giving a September 11 examples in the context of business travel, but I'll actually give an example in the context of business continuity. After September 11, a lot of companies started to ask themselves the question of, hey, if all of my servers in all of my IT sits in one building, okay, what will I do next, right? And this is actually where the cloud and solutions like AWS, Amazon Web Services, started to grow really quickly, because you wanted to have, in terms of business continuity, you want to have a solution that is not physically located in one building. I think here you'll see the same thing. People will need to continue to run their businesses in a much more challenging environment. It is relevant for any, I would say, functionality in businesses, and definitely for business travel.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess what's happening now is that the coronavirus has basically kind of tested people's ability to react. No one could probably imagine the scale that this was going to kind of shut down most of travel. So in the future, it's going to make people test a bit harsher potentially. I'll send to Sean. We had during the registration process for this event, we had some people could send in questions, and there's one here again going on the kind of regulation angle. Will we see stricter regulation and awareness around diseases at every airport and hotel? Do you think that's going to start happening?
Yeah, first of all, we have a partner in China, and we learn a lot from them. I was talking with the team yesterday that, like, if you talk with people from China or Singapore or South Korea, and I had I've talked with the people actually from all of these places last week. You hear that the governments are actually pushing to have a certain business continuity. So in China, and I think you touched it earlier with the question of consumer travel versus business travel, what I've been hearing that is going on in China, they're actually prioritizing business travel over consumer because they want to move the economy forward, but with restrictions. So for example, if you are arriving to Beijing, and there is an entire setup there of landing at a different airport and an entire setup around safety, but eventually you arrive to Beijing from inland China, you need to go strictly to the hotel as a business traveler, and you go to your meeting and you're getting back. So I think as long as the health crisis is still there, you will see more restrictions. But I think that governments will have the reason to actually promote business travel as a priority because you will want to get the economy going. So again, I think that kind of it's a good idea generally to look at what people are doing in Singapore, China, South Korea as kind of examples of maybe how our life will look like in 2 months from now or 3 months from now.
Yeah. Okay. How can countries prioritize business travel? Do you think there's going to be more kind of tax reliefs or better deals for corporate travelers, perhaps, or more help for airlines? I mean, how would you envisage a country promoting business travel over leisure tourism?
Yeah, and by the way, it's not a prediction, right? I think that right now in this environment, it's really hard to predict what people will do. I just think that we know that business travel has a big part of driving the GDP. And I know that governments are right now really trying to do whatever they can to keep the economy going. And you can even see it in the US with the stimulus plan, right? It's really, designed to help industries that are in travel, including the travel industry. So I think that it tells you that governments sees travel generally, and definitely business travel, as part of infrastructure. And we all know, all of us are in this space. We know that it is an important infrastructure, and eventually business travel continuity, I believe, would be something that every company, every business travel manager will ask themselves, how do I support the business going forward? So governments will do it, the business travel managers will do it, CEOs will do it. Interestingly enough, while we saw a huge drop in usage, right, in actually booking flights, March was our strongest month ever from getting new leads and also getting new customers. In fact, we've signed 2 days ago our biggest customer ever. And I cannot share their name yet, but we'll share it, in the next, I would say, a few weeks. But it just, and I saw the attention that we got through this account, but also in other accounts. We are now getting attention from CEOs and CFOs, which is very unique, right? The discussion really went up in the organization. It tells you how much this thing is becoming important, how much business travel continuity is important.
Okay, so the value of the travel management company, or just the value of travel, managed travel, is perhaps going to go up the agenda on a lot of on a lot of companies' radars as a result of this, perhaps.
I think you cannot afford going forward not to manage travel. So I know that there are companies that didn't manage travel. I think you will not be able to afford it. That's one. And two, I think that if you had a system that you had big percentages of people going rogue, you cannot afford it. You will need to have systems that are getting a 100% adoption. If not, you'll be in a mess. And the third thing, I think that, when there are issues, you go to technology. You see how the governments are handling the crises. It's through innovation. It's through data. And it's the same with anything, including business travel. Business travel managers, CEOs, CFOs will need to be efficient here, effective, and you can only do it with technology. You cannot do it in the old ways. If you have a lot of agents that needs to pick up the phone and having a discussion, book my trip, and the business travel, the agent will check if it's in policy, out of policy. These things are not going to work anymore.
Yeah. Okay. And, if you don't mind me saying, TripActions is a relatively new player in the travel management space. Do you think this kind of newness or naivety has worked in your favor? Have you been able to, be more agile or think outside the box a little bit more compared to other companies because you're so new? Do you think that's helped?
Yeah, I think being fast and nimble is always important, but obviously for a new player, it is easier, right? I was telling the team yesterday, let's say that I was the CEO of one of the big TMCs right now, without mentioning names, right? I would not be able to act as fast as we've acted across the board, whether it's to release features, whether it's to adjust our headcount, whether it's to basically making sure that we'll be around in 12, 24, and 36 months, right? So I think being nimble and being a tech company that all of the infrastructure runs on cloud solutions gives a huge advantage to companies that are tech companies or startups by nature.
Yeah, okay. Again, on the sort of technology notes and going back to questions we received during the registration for this seminar,
Sure.
Another one which I thought was quite interesting, which I'll share with you. Since 9/11, the systems designed to provide visibility and tracking abilities have not been tested to the level they are now. So will companies now take tracking tools more seriously in the future? What's your take on that, do you think?
Yeah, I think for us, from day one, we realized that the fact that you are using a mobile app to book your trip and to support yourself while you're on the road gives the companies a very strong capability to know where their employees are. And this is important. It was important, by the way, in the past. It is important now, and it will be more important in the future. And it's not because you need, I would say, a big brother kind of a solution. It's more about the safety of the employees. The employees can opt out, can opt in, but you as a company, you need to know that you've just sent a lot of employees to Italy, and you need to act upon that, right? You have this responsibility even as human beings. So I think that tracking or knowing where the employees are was always a functionality of TripActions. The ability to communicate with them, right? It's not just the ability to know where they are, but the ability to communicate with them, to start a chat with them, and to tell them what to do. This is so important. You don't want them to be there alone in Paris when all of the flights are getting canceled. You need to support them. It's the duty of the company, and it's our duty as a TMC. We usually have an SLA of picking up all of the chats and calls in less than a minute. On the week that everything got canceled, it went up to 6 minutes. But we could still support you in 6 minutes in times that all of the call centers, all of the travel agencies you needed to wait for hours to get support. So yeah. This is very, very powerful.
Yeah. So perhaps, in the post-COVID-19 world, there's going to be a more emphasis on, the online booking tools perhaps than before. I mean, do you think the OBTs have kind of stepped up in this crisis overall?
I don't think it's an OBT question because, the OBT concept, it basically says, hey, the service is being delivered by a TMC, and I'm going to put some technology on top of this, almost like and I will try to create some service. I think that you need to have an end-to-end solution. The agent, the ability to cancel a trip, the ability to support the trip, with the OBT, with the actual booking tool, and with the actual ability, the itinerary, the ability to support you while you're on the road, and to connect it all together. I think that's the only possible solution. And I think there are a few companies, TripActions is one of them, that can do it. All of the rest is separation between an OBT that was developed in the 90s and a TMC that has a lot of agents that can book trips for you. I don't think it has worked, and I don't think it will work in the future, definitely when you need to really combine data and actions.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to wrap up really quickly, but I just want to go again back to something, the poll results we've had are really interesting. So again, the 60% of the respondents thought that give it a couple of months, a few months, business travel is going to be back up and running. This seminar is called, Travel's Path Forward. As a data company, is there any kind of insight you can give us into how people are searching for travel? So you've got all these, you've got your booking tool in place.
Yeah.
Are people looking to book in the immediate future or long term? How are the stats looking before we close up?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and the question about the 2 months and so on. We, since the beginning of it, really deployed our data team to slice and dice everything, right? There is actually a lot of information sources right now that are delivered to anybody that want to in kind of an open manner. So you can get any data that you want to right now. It's an initiative that started by the US government. And we are slicing and dicing every data around how the coronavirus outbreaks really behaves in various places in the world. And the intent is to really connect it to our platform and then to provide some recommendations. So that's one thing. Regarding trends, we do see some people doing bookings, but we do see more questions around the terms. Is it refundable or not? And where exactly, and can I, basically a lot of how fast could I cancel it, right? And will I get reimbursed if I'm canceling it? So there is a lot of questions around that while you're booking the trip. For us, it actually, these questions delivered in the booking capability. So you can actually see what are the terms and conditions. Obviously, airlines have updated them, and you have more flexibility right now and so on. So we do see some bookings, but definitely the trend was to completely, stop travel.
Yeah, and I guess refunds and cancellations are, a pretty big question now in terms of cash flow for, survival of a lot of companies. A totally different topic, but yeah, I mean, what's interesting here, it's kind of, the duty of care, and again, risk. It's kind of data is going to become more important. So yeah, thanks for sharing your insights for the last 20 minutes with us on how TripActions has dealt with things and kind of best practice, duty of care, some interesting pieces to come out of that. So thanks again to yourself and to Sean earlier on, and I think that's a wrap now, and I'm going to hand back to Rafa, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Cheers.
you, everybody. Thank you again for joining us, to all of our speakers, and also to our partner, Vidalia. We wanted to mention that tomorrow we also have a webinar coming up on the relief package in the US. So that's going to be tomorrow, April 1st at noon Eastern. Register now via our website, and you'll hear more about how this will impact the travel industry. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us again soon.